when you have these big cultural moments and you have these big movements just across the board, a lot of those things are going to make their way directly into design. And when you have a lot of stuff like in this past summer, specifically with all of the protests and everything, a lot of the design trends that are coming back are because people were informing themselves on protests and civil rights movements in the past. And in turn, you're going to see that design. It just goes to show like how powerful design is and how powerful art is and its ability to frame entire, cultural moments.
I think just to start, maybe, I want to talk a little bit about specialization versus being a generalist, because I think with all the guests that we brought on the show, if I had to pick one, I would say that you're probably the most specialized just with the work that I see you sharing. Like if an animation video and some sneakers comes up in my feed, I'm like, this is Schnoes. Was that always the game plan, or like how did that start? Where did you first get into that niche, and how has it evolved since you first got in?
I think for most people to be successful, I think they should specialize. I think the only reason this works for me is just because I just have such a short attention span with everything. I think if I had to pick something that like is my specialization, it would probably be picking up new things. So I mean, like a year and a half ago, like I couldn't even, open a new document or like render out a picture in Cinema 4D. And, a year later, like we just wrapped up, our first project was with Target and Clean Canteen for back to school. We just did something for the NFL, but ended up not getting used, but turned into something else. That led to doing augmented reality stuff, and all of that circles back into photo and video because we can take all of those assets and we can virtualize everything. So I think that my specialization is being able to adapt and being able to pick up new things. The only problem with that is I don't really have advice on how you would do that, because my answer to that in my personal case is I work nonstop. From the time I wake up until I go to sleep at like 3 or 4 in the morning, like I'm doing something that would probably be considered work, even though if it's not for like a client or something like that, like I'm learning a new idea, like I'm learning a new concept. Because working isn't just the act of like actual production of whatever you're doing. Like working is building that knowledge base and being able to put things together. And it's hard and it's very, very stressful. And not a lot of people can or would even want to do that. I mean, it's to the point now where like there is no real like work-life balance. It's kind of like I'm just always on all the time. So I mean, that's my hobby, but that's what I enjoy. So it's not like, I'm not saying that like I work harder or that than anyone, because that's absolutely not the case. I'm lazy as can be. I'm just, I just pick what I want to give my attention to. And so far it's working out really, really well. So I think it's something that you learn over time. It's something I didn't understand for the first 5-6 years of me doing this. And in the past, like 2 years, I've just realized that if I have a feeling about what I think is going to happen, a lot of times it does happen. So the easiest way for me to prepare for that is to just, let curiosity take over. And I think that's one of the best things you can do, just in creativity overall, is just letting that curiosity take over.
Mm-hmm. You touched on learning there. I think it's one of the common themes I see throughout your work. In terms of, I want to ask this question because for me, I started with sports and design and motion. But I found that like once I got out of those areas, the best things that I learned in design for sports didn't work if I was doing a website for another client. And what I want to ask is like, so you have photo and video and you talked about AR. How much, when you're learning a new skill, do you bring the things that you've learned previously in? And like, what does that process look like when you are bringing on something where you're like, I have either limited understanding, like you brought up the example of like a year ago, you didn't even know how to open up a photo in Cinema 4D. When you have a new piece of software, you're trying to learn something new that you don't have any base for. Do you see yourself bringing in those skills that you learned in other disciplines, or is it like, I got to completely kind of change my approach here?
I mean, I think I think you always bring those things with you because it's, there's this quote. I don't know who it's by. I want to say Warren Buffett, but that's probably wrong. That you can't, like, knowledge is a compounding thing. So like once you have that base understanding, you take that with you everywhere. Like that becomes context for every decision you make after that. So with the way that I learn things, like I have a very specific process of learning things. It's funny to call it specific because it's very chaotic, but the way that I learn things is full immersion. So if, like when we were doing the Clean Canteen and Target campaign in the summer, like that was a point in time where we had literally signed the contract like a week and a half before everything shut down. And when I signed that contract, I had no idea what I was doing. So it was like one of those things where I was like, okay, well, I have to figure this out. I have a couple weeks to do this. And then I sat there and I brought my server, my computer and everything from the office to my house. And I worked for probably 300 or 400 hours that month just on that and just learning. And the way that I do it is I think about everything that I think is not possible at first, because if you sit there and you're like, okay, well, I want to learn how to use Photoshop. So I'm going to do Photoshop basics, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go in order like a textbook. And, I was always terrible at school, and that method never worked for me. So the way that I learn things is just, that's all I surround myself with for that period of time. So, I always tell people that like, I don't really watch TV that much. Like I don't really have the attention span for it anymore, but like I'll watch YouTube for probably 10 to 12 hours a day, or like have it on the other monitor in my office or something. And I'll just watch as many things as I possibly can about whatever the subject is. And I'm not worried about retaining anything. I'm just worried about getting that information in. Because one of the main things that I learned in college, I'd probably say the only thing that I learned in college, because I have a degree in marketing. Like I was in art school for 2 years and I got out of it because they didn't want me to freelance, and I didn't agree with that. The only thing is there's this effect, I think it's called the recency effect. And basically if there's like a word that you've never heard before, right? Say it's like xylophone, something weird like that, right? If you've never heard it, there's a very, very high chance that you've heard it before, but you've never like acknowledged it. But if you hear it within the next, 24 hours, because you heard it that one time, it sticks and it jumps out at you because you're like, oh, that's that thing I just learned about. So with me, it's like, it's a shotgun approach of just watching and consuming as much as I possibly can. And then going back over. And then if I wanted to do something else, then it's just, I know where to start. So it usually ends up with me trying to do things that are way more difficult than should be attempted if you have never done it before. But setting that higher bar gets you a lot further, faster.
Absolutely. You brought up an interesting point there with not gelling with the traditional school system of here's steps 1 to 5. We're going to start at Photoshop 101, and then we're going to run all the way through. And it's something that's actually come up with a lot of guests where either they didn't like elementary school or they didn't like how college was structured. Are you the type of person that when you try to learn a new skill, is it something that's like super hyper focused for you? Because when I took on After Effects, I started with Photoshop and static design. And then After Effects became available. I got a better computer. I could run the software. And then for the next 3 months and a half, I would say, it was just all that I was doing. I was consuming tutorials. I was looking at how to make certain effects. And it was just everything that I was, like all the bandwidth that I had in my head was focused on that. Is that kind of what you're talking about when you say learning through immersion?
Sort of. So when I am learning something, so like right now, we're getting into obviously a lot more AR stuff and a lot more just procedural stuff across the board. So I'm trying to minimize how much I have to use After Effects because I just hate it, because it just, regardless of how powerful the computers and stuff that we have are, the ideas that we try to put through After Effects never seem to really gel with it. And it causes a lot of slowdown. So like right now I'm trying to see it's possible that we can replace a lot of what we do in After Effects with Touch Designer. And just the procedural methods of doing things. So it's not like when I'm doing something, it's not me going through a course. Like I never do anything like in a linear path because I get bored. So if I jump around a lot, it helps me ask those questions faster. And then I just look for the answers to my questions. And when I'm looking for the answers to my questions, a lot of times that answer won't make sense to me. So then I have to investigate the answer. So I kind of work in a circle. But it's like that whole mentality of, just break shit fast and figure it out. And that's the way I've done everything. Like I didn't even know how to put a drill bit in a drill in like June. And now we're building full sets out. And, we did like some robotics and stuff, which I've never done anything like that before. So it was just like taking these small things and like figuring out how they can make my ideas possible. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, a lot of what people see like on my Instagram is just shoe stuff, because if I post anything else, it's like not going to get any love whatsoever. But like as cool as the shoe stuff is, like I don't even get super, super excited about it anymore. You can see like we have all of these that I still have to shoot. And, but we're taking all of the stuff that we've been doing in other aspects and other fields, and we're applying it to that. And then it's going to be something that's exciting. And that's something that works for the client and helps us, raise the rate faster and make more money and get more ideas out.
Absolutely. And just to clarify there, when you say that, you're learning through these projects, is this strictly client projects? Are you taking on a client project and they say, we want AR or we want you to build a new rig? Like, is that learning all taking place in client projects, or do you have personal projects that you kind of balance that out with?
I don't have any personal projects.
No personal projects. Okay. So it's all through the client work.
Everything I do ends up being for a client. Like I'll do a lot of tests and things like that, but
yeah.
I mean, one of my goals for this year was to actually start doing personal projects, but the problem with personal projects for me is I always overthink it, and then it starts taking away from work that needs to be done. Because I get so locked in on something that I don't want other things to suffer. So I don't really have personal projects at all.
Beyond sneakers, you said that the work doesn't excite you anymore to the point where it excited you before. Where do you see the client work evolving from here? You said that as you kind of learn and take on these new skills, that kind of allows you to charge a premium with pricing. We had talked about a couple projects before we actually started this call. We don't have to go into those, but in terms of forward direction with your client practice, like what interests you right now? What skills are you looking to take on in the future? And what does that look like for you?
Well, first I just want to clarify what I mean by the not exciting, because it's still good work, but when I finish something, I usually don't look at it probably ever again. There's very few projects that I go back and look at just because of what I had mentioned before, that I'll start over analyzing things, and I'll just get like, me ending a project is very difficult because I'll like the thing that we just wrapped up with the NFL, like I got approval for what we were going ahead with, and I changed it 4 times after that because I was just like, well, I got this better idea that I'm more excited about. And that's something you should absolutely not do ever. It's terrible for business. It's terrible for stress levels. Just like try to avoid it as much as possible. I can't help it. But sorry, what was the original question? I just wanted to clarify that before I answered the question.
No, for sure. The original question was like, so.
Oh, like what I'm into next. Got it.
Yeah. What are you into next?
I mean, that's a hard one. Like a lot of stuff that I've been, like everything I've been pitching lately has been AR and VR because I'm excited about what I think that we can do with it. There's a lot of things that I feel like people haven't really explored because they get so tunnel vision with the context of things that already exist in that space. I think that's a problem with like a lot of sports design, actually. I follow a ton of people that do sports design, and they're all amazing designers. The work is amazing. And I mean, a lot of times, the work that they're posting is dictated by the school that they work at or the team that they work for. So I can tell that like there's a ton of talent there, but I can tell that, like their AD or their CD just like wants what everybody else wants. And with sports, I've noticed that, especially in the past, like I'd say like year and a half, you'll have two teams that are supposed to be completely different brands, but everyone wants to do the same exact thing. And I think that that's a lot of what's happening with like AR and VR, which is why I'm excited about it. And I don't know. I don't want to say like I'm bored with photo and video, but I feel like the place that I'm at with it right now, it doesn't have a ton of room for me to be as creative with it as I want to be. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we don't do that I don't think I'm good at, and I don't necessarily have an interest in doing more. Like if anybody looks at my work, you could probably see that like my entire career kind of centers around focusing on these very small pieces, like, 6 seconds, 8 seconds tops. So it's like, I'm putting all of this effort into one small thing. And then in turn, it's not something where we're going to do like a lot of like, short narrative work or anything like that. So it's just getting ourselves in a space where we can be creative. And I think with AR and VR, we can do that. I think people are going to get tired of what we've been doing if people aren't already, especially the shoe brands. There's only so many ways you can shoot a shoe. And I've shot them hundreds of ways in the past few years at this point. And at the end of the day, it's a shoe is a shoe. So it's making this jump to like AR and VR. I think that we can take a lot of the things that we've done with shoes, and I think we can take those ideas to a much higher level to reach more people. If we just switch up the tools a little bit, but keep that context in mind.
I want to dive quickly into VR and AR. One of the areas that I see some real innovation happening is within e-commerce. And I think kind of what you're speaking to is that I guess the general idea of AR and VR has for a long time has been like these clunky devices, whether it's like that big Oculus rig that you wear over your face. But where I've seen a lot of innovation after the coronavirus hit was that they're actually bringing these virtual and these augmented experiences to storefronts. Is that something that interests you at all? Do you see, and maybe more specifically, my question would be, where do you see your skill set being able to innovate in that space? And does it connect to e-commerce? Is it something else? Like where do you see yourself applying yourself within that niche?
I mean, honestly, I don't think it's a niche. I think it's just an extension of retail overall. I've said for a long time that when you have these, as soon as internet catches up across the board, everything is going to change. People aren't going to want to go to stores like they used to. I'm not gonna say that like nobody's gonna leave the house, because that's just not true. Like I'm in Texas, it's like nothing ever happened here, regardless of how bad things are going. So it's something that I think is an extension. Like I don't look at it just like I don't look at photo or video as like their own things that just dictate everything else around them. I think the important thing is putting the brand first and putting the brand in the best light that it can be. So if that involves AR and VR, like awesome, let's do it. If we're working with a brand and they're like, oh, we would just want to do like an Instagram filter where we're just like putting a product on a table, like that doesn't do anything. Like nobody cares about that. Like you're just doing something to check off a box at that point, which isn't work that like I'm really interested in doing. It's work, like it pays, but it's not something, it's something that they're doing for the wrong reasons. And when the brand is doing something for the wrong reasons, they don't care about it enough to, one, push it, or two, put a lot of budget behind it. It's kind of just like, oh, you're here, you can do this, just do this for us. And then you're just filling up time at that point. So like when we were doing, in 2019, I designed a few cannabis brands for this group in Massachusetts. And when we were doing all of the pieces surrounding that, like we had a lot of limitations because unlike in Colorado and California, where all of the advertising regulations are so relaxed on cannabis, in Massachusetts at the time, like you couldn't do like any type of out of home advertising, which is billboards, bus stops, like anything like that. You couldn't put a logo on a shirt. you couldn't even have you couldn't even mail anything to anyone. The social networks themselves are very inconsistent in the rules about cannabis. So like the day that my client launched, like Instagram shut the account down, and we lost like $300 worth of work. It was all for nothing. And with stuff like that, and like with AR and VR, like that was the whole reason that we got into 3D in the first place, was because I couldn't get to Massachusetts to shoot this product that we had designed all this stuff for. And obviously we're not going to, mail the product across the country. So the only thing that I could do was to try and 3D model it, and going from no 3D knowledge whatsoever to try and make photorealistic cannabis gummies. It's not a very easy task, but it allowed me to get into a space where like I saw what options could be possible, and like where we could be more flexible. And that, slowly built into all of these other ideas that we wanted to do, like AR displays and, video displays in the stores and things like that. And taking all of the limitations we had and turning those into captive audience, like strengths. So like there's certain things, like there's a startup. I don't know if they're still around. They might've shut down last year. I think they're called Showfields. And basically they would take these spaces. And I went to one across the street from Kith in New York. And it's basically all these direct to consumer companies that have very focused product lines. So it'll be like, I think one of the ones they have was Quip, which makes toothbrushes. And at the time they just made toothbrushes. So they just had like a little booth. It was like a kiosk at a mall, but it was, this Instagram brand in real life. So it's like all the people that are saying that retail is dead. There's people that are lining up to go to these stores that are just internet brands. So it's just like saying Print's dead. Print's not dead. It's never going to die. Like nothing ever dies. It just changes shape. And I think the exciting part about, doing what I do and the work that we do is that we're part of that adaptability, I guess. And pushing those ideas into a new space or reframing them.
So one of the things that keeps coming up in this conversation, and I think the best nugget was when you got approval from a client and then you had a new idea or a new direction to take the project and you changed it 3 times. For you, outside of just working harder and just constantly being on, how do you balance learning new stuff and pushing projects in new directions with having a deadline and being on, I don't know what it is, maybe a 2-week deadline, a 3-week deadline? How do you get the project out while still kind of fulfilling that need for you to experiment and to learn and to push the project in exciting ways?
Like at the end of the day, like you can't have a business if you don't turn stuff in. So at a certain point, you need to know when it's time to stop. You need to know when it's time to stop experimenting and just get it done. And that was really hard for me at first, because I felt like we weren't delivering work that was at its best, because we were basically like, okay, we're going to run out of time if we don't do this, and just get this done. And I mean, it still happens today. Like I'm usually like right at my deadline on most projects. I never miss a deadline. But I'm usually like right up against it. So I think at that point it's a fight or flight thing, but it's not something where like I have like a general process of, this is it. Like ideally what you want to do is have your entire project planned out. And if I was good at planning, which I'm not, because I overthink things in the planning stage, I think one of the best things you can possibly have is if you are fortunate enough to have a team of people or have people around you and have somebody that's actually a creative director, that's actually doing things that a creative director does. Like just sitting there and, giving ideas and, wearing fancy clothes doesn't make you a creative director. A creative director is somebody that can make sure that vision stays on track. And sometimes, you have to accept that you're not that person. And technically, I guess my job title, if I had to have one, would be creative director, but that's only because a lot of the times I'm the one that's planning out most of everything. But if it came down to if I was a good creative director, I'd probably be the worst one in the country. So it's something that works for me, but for most people, I think you just need to understand when enough is enough, and you need to understand that your personal feelings towards a project may not be the same as other people's. Like what I think is cool is probably not the same as what other people think is cool. I was lucky with all the shoe stuff that we've done that it's caught on, because realistically it's not anything that people are interested in. Like a lot of the ideas I have come from like going to like, raves and stuff like that, where like the lights are just insane and you have these crazy sound, and it's just this whole like experience around it. And I try to, distill that into something that's like really small. So a lot of times that'll end up being like a random shoe off the shelf from Finish Line, but it sounds like it was like from Tenet or something, with like a bunch of like brass and stuff in the background. And that's stuff that's cool to me. And luckily, clients like Finish Line, like they support that and they want me to do what I think is cool. But it's not always the best move. So you just need to understand, when it's time to be a business and when it's time to be creative.
My follow-up question is I want to dive into the team right now. How big are you? Like did you bring somebody else on? And has that helped you facilitate that process of balancing learning with just getting the project out the door? Is it just you, or you talked about a team? I have the other person, I have one other person that works with me. Okay.
And then I have a partner that helps me with like, more business stuff. The person that helps me is the guy who just walked through here, Jay, and he's been with me for about a year now, a little bit over a year. And, since he's been here, like everything, it helps you progress faster because you're able to get ideas outside of your head and see if they actually work. Like a lot of the times, we'll be doing something and I know he gets extremely frustrated with the way that I work, but a lot of times we'll have a thing that we need to shoot 5 shoes, and he'll ask me what we're doing. And I have no idea whatsoever. Most of the stuff that we do, I come up with on the spot, for various reasons, but, especially with shoes, almost everything is like, as we're doing it, which a lot of time means that we're doing stuff 3 or 4 times. So I think having somebody there that's willing and able to put up with that, I think is a huge asset. And, hopefully we're going to be bringing some more people in the next couple weeks, hopefully. Cause at a certain point, like I don't have enough time in the day. Like I think it's getting to the point where if things get any bigger, any busier, like we wouldn't be able to deliver on what we need to deliver on. So that at a certain point, like you do have to grow, unless you just want to be a freelancer, which is totally cool. I know a lot of small studios, they work with the whole, hire freelancers as needed, structure, which is cool. We've done that in the past. I did that when we were finally able to make merch for the cannabis group in Massachusetts. I reached out to my friend Dewey, he's a collage artist, Dewey Saunders. He did Anderson .Paak's album cover. He did some really, really great stuff for us. And that was a cool project. When I was shooting the NFL draft a couple of years ago, we had like some random stuff come in that I couldn't do. And I had some friends come shoot it and it worked out great. And stuff like that is awesome. And it's helpful and it helps you grow the business. But I think the biggest thing about team is you need to know when it's time to grow and when it's time to figure it out yourself. Because there's a lot of time people get straight into that. And then you get to a point where you have, too many cooks in the kitchen, I guess. And you have all these ideas that everyone wants their idea to stand out more than everyone else's. Because a big problem with these smaller studios and media groups and things like that is you'll have 4 or 5 people that go in as partners, but then, one person is going to start working more than others. And then it's just going to cause this whole thing. So there's like a weird gap that you have to cross from, 2 to 3 people to like 10 plus. And I think how you manage that gap in the middle is really, really important.
When you brought your first person, I've talked to other creatives who've done the scale thing, and they realized that they didn't have the capacity to take on new projects like you mentioned. I think one of the hardest things when you're kind of handing off work or bringing in a new team member is that, like you mentioned, you kind of lose that control over your work almost. Mm-hmm. For you, what was that process like? And did you have anything that helped you along the way to like maintain that feeling that you had your hands on the work and that you were, you were influencing what was being put out?
Well, I've never hired anyone to do what I do. And I don't know how soon I would even do that. Like Jay is great at shooting. He's great at editing. But he's not super into 3D and stuff like that, which is cool. Like I want him to do the things that he is good at. Like when we were shooting stuff in Miami last year for the Super Bowl, it was when I realized that like, if it comes down to it and we're doing a video, like it makes much more sense to have me direct him shooting than it does to have both of us shooting or vice versa. And I think that's just like a natural progression of roles, because he's not the first person that I've brought in, but the first two people that we hired, they were assistants, and one was an assistant and she was awful. She would always get mad and not do what she was supposed to do. And then the other one was this college kid who didn't actually know really how to do anything that he, had kind of put forth that he knew how to do. Once we got into it, he didn't really do the work, and he was very standoffish whenever I would tell him to do something, and it's just not a good way to work. So with Jay, it's the first time that, I've had somebody that like, I can tell him an idea and I know that it's something that works, and it's finding that right fit. And that's with any company in general.
I want to go back to I opened this call telling you that I'm just amazed. Every week it feels like you're building a different rig, practically. I'm interested, how do these rigs change the workflow on a project, and like how time intensive for getting this? Because I would imagine that the reason that you're building the rig is that you want a very specific kind of movement, or they allow you to do something that you just couldn't do or shooting handheld. How do building these rigs change your work project, and what are some of the challenges that you kind of have to solve when you're making these things?
I mean, the rigs, like, they're not a super big deal. Like anybody that's been on any type of commercial or film set has seen way more complicated rigs. Like what we're doing is basically supplementing equipment that we have. So like if you look at, like if somebody were to go to my Instagram page, there's something we did for the Ultra Boost 20. It was one of the last things we did for Finish Line last year. And that shot, we had some chains hanging and there was a shoe hanging and the camera was spinning around. And I've been obsessed with the bullet time camera since I was a kid. I just always thought that it was just the most insane thing I had ever seen, but obviously like I don't have the budget for 50 cameras. I don't have, $100,000 for a robot. So like we have a crappy motion controller system, which is this SERP system that's like a little 3-axis thing, and it lets us get repeatable movements sometimes. But the main thing is the rigs themselves are usually just to prop up product. So we can't have a hand there. And if we're swinging a camera around something, we need it to stay in the same place. So they're really just tools at the time. So like if anybody, wants to do stuff like that, it's not hard. It just requires a lot of grip equipment, like little adapters and things like that. Because at that point, your set just turns into a Lego set, basically. Like you're just putting pieces together to make your idea possible. The stuff that we just did for the Ultra Boost 21 was probably like one of my favorite rigs that we've done. But it was really literally just this that we plugged up to a clear mannequin leg that we put a shoe on. So stuff like that is, the only reason we did that is because like Jay couldn't stand there and not move his leg while we took 100 pictures. So if you're doing stuff that's like stop motion or something like that, like you need to make sure everything's really rigid and it stays in its place, because most of what we do isn't video. A lot of people think that like they see these posts and they automatically think it's like video and we're shooting everything like slow-mo and things like that, which 90% of the time isn't true. Almost everything on my page is all like stop motion or hyperlapses or something like that, for the reasons that I can have a lot more resolution to work with. So we don't have a red camera or an RE or something like that where we're going to get crazy high resolution and clarity. And I don't really want to spend the money on that right now. So the way that we can cheat that and the way that we can get that look that I'm going for is to use, high-end flash systems, and then animate those together. So there was a lot of things that, prior to literally last summer, like we physically couldn't do because we didn't have the equipment. So like when I was doing a lot of shoot stuff for like 2 years, everything was with a Fuji X-T2, where I was just like swinging around with my hands, and we would get, 14 frames a second. And we would get like a second and a half of footage, and I had to make that work, which is what led to, all the animations and things like that. But like now with us shooting with an A7R4 and, pro photo flashes where we can get 70 flashes consistently, that gives us a lot more. We went from, a second and a half to like 2 seconds of usable frames that we can use. And now instead of just having, a 20 megapixel shot that we can have for a second and a half, we were able to make this entire ultra boost spot last week with 300 still photos because we had 60 megapixels to work with. And we had all of these motion control shots lined up, and everything just kind of fit together. So it's seeing what works best for your workflow and the way that you like to deliver on things and the level of flexibility that you want to have.
I kind of want to peel back the layers of inspiration for you, at least. You talked that for you on these sneaker projects, at least, you go from a process of taking something, whether it's going to a concert or a rave, where you have this experience with lots of lights, and you really compress that down into it's almost micro narrative, whether that's 2 seconds or 5 seconds. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, outside of concerts, like where else do you pull inspiration from, and what's that process been like for integrating that and kind of translating that vision into the actual work?
I mean, a lot of the inspiration is I guess from like ideas of form itself. So if anybody were to follow me on Instagram, they'll see that I buy a lot of reference books, just because I think that reference books, and this is why print isn't dead, reference books allow you to get inspired a lot faster because of the way that they're curated. You're getting the best of the best in this like small or, usually large format, like digestible way of looking at it. It's like looking at a art gallery in a book. So, a lot of my inspirations is as far as like form and light and shadow, a lot of that comes from architecture. Like I've been completely obsessed for the past like 3 to 4 months with, and it's been a while, but specifically in the last 3 to 4 months of like post Stalin, like Soviet design. It just looks incredible to me. Even the design of Call of Duty Cold War, the newest one, is just absolutely incredible, and everything about it, and the reasonings behind why everything looks that way. So I'm really into furniture. I love furniture design and Bauhaus and that whole design movement. And when you find these things that you're interested in and you start really getting into them and learning about them, and you learn about the histories of those things, and you see how the histories of these things are tied together, it's something that allows you to kind of predict what's going to happen next. I've been saying for probably 2 years now that I think it was time for, a lot of like psychedelic design and things like that to return, because everything is very, very cyclical. And you're starting to see a lot of that come back. And it usually comes back in order. Like there was a point in time where like aesthetics to everyone was an all white house and like a, future hat, and everything looked like it was, ready to be at Coachella. And now you have these like crazy fonts and like bright colors, and you have design that can be considered brutalist because it's so abrasive, but people are really adopting, and they're really getting into it because it's something that's eye-catching. That's something that I realized a long time ago, and why I started putting a big focus on it, because I saw that it was going to come back because of a lot of like looking into the history of brutalism, and a lot of things that created that movement are very, very similar to, current events and cultural events that are happening today. And when you have, I guess this is getting kind of deep with it, but when you have these big cultural moments, and you have these big movements just across the board, a lot of those things are going to make their way directly into design. And when you have a lot of stuff like in this past summer, specifically with all of the protests and everything, a lot of the design trends that are coming back are because people were informing themselves on, protests and civil rights movements in the past. And in turn, you're going to see that design. And that's not trying to take away anything from, the movements themselves, but it just goes to show like how powerful design is and how powerful art is, and its ability to frame entire, cultural moments. And getting back to the original question of how I do that, like these books help me find out what that history is and see where I think things are going next, and find things that even if I don't see where something's going next, I'll probably see something that'll inspire another work or inspire me to change something or get into something new. So they're almost like a map to me, but it's just like a map from the past, I guess.
That's a great answer. I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Just closing up here, for people that don't follow you online, where would you direct them to look? And on Instagram or a website, where can people find you?
You can find me directly on Instagram and Twitter at SCKNOWS. So it's SCKNOWS. And then as soon as work lightens up a little bit, the studio rebrand will be launching under Chroma Spring. So I'm really excited about that. And that was supposed to launch on my birthday last month, but we've been a bit busy. So hopefully before the middle of February, we'll be able to launch that.
Thank you so much, man. This is going to be dropping tomorrow, I think. So can't wait for people to listen to this. I think you brought tons of value, and I'm sure that somebody's going to be able to pull out something.